I think really did want to attend. He said from the outset he wanted to come, and he's asked for the reference for the new YouTube film. Tony Holden, who again had another appointment, Julian Halls, and Trevor Gurney. And our speakers, of course, are Helen Sibley, Community Assets Manager for South Norfolk Council, Matt Davies, Manager of the Norwich Fringe Project, and Helen Baczkowska, I'll get it right shortly, author and ecologist from the Norfolk Wildlife Trust. Just as a terribly brief kind of introduction, the world is facing some serious challenges, as we all know, at the present time, mostly connected to the overheating of the planet and the steep decline of nature, possibly as a consequence. Solutions to many of the problems lie outside our influence, such as the transition to renewable energy and the slowing of growth. What we can influence is increasing and improving our green spaces, helping people to connect across the natural world. And this will likely mean more tree planting and taking simple actions for rewilding and restoration of nature. We can help to transform our urban areas and help people to look afresh at their gardens, to create healthy living systems soaking up millions of tons of CO2. So it's a good thing to be doing. So without further ado, can I ask Helen Sibley to take the floor, please?
Yes. Hello, everybody. As I said, I'm Helen Sibley. I work for South Norfolk Council and in the Community Assets team, and I have responsibility for all of South Norfolk's public open spaces, play areas, trees that are on council-owned land, and then our countryside sites and commons, which don't have any owners, but also a few commons that do have owners. And so I've quite a wide remit. I concentrate mainly on our countryside sites, commons, trees, tree management, tree inspections, whereas my other colleague concentrates mainly on the play areas and more of the formal public open spaces, but there's a crossover on those areas. We also deal with some other very boring stuff, which is some public toilets and street lights, but they're really quite boring and not really important to this. So I'm going to give you a quick, I'm going to talk a bit about an approach that we're now going to start taking with South Norfolk Council owned land. And that is trying to look at reducing how often we mow a lot of these sites with the long, like wildflower meadows. So I'm going to just do a quick chat about why I'm doing that, how I would like to approach it, and the benefits I think that we'll get from this new approach to our mowing regimes. I'm going to try and, I've done a very, very basic PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to try and share my screen. If it doesn't work, we'll abandon that and I'll just talk about it. But so we'll see if it works. So bear with me. Oh, I can't do that. So I won't share my screen. It's not letting me do it. So anyway, I put a little bit of a strap line. Whether I'll use this going forward, I don't know, but I've called it "Don't Mow, Let It Grow" as a bit of a strap line. And the idea being is letting grasslands flourish because it gives large benefits to biodiversity. So within the council, as I've said, we own lots of bits of public open space. Now, some of them are for formal recreation, and those will always be mown regularly because they are places where children go and play ball games, people play football, people have picnics, and they do lots of playing. So we don't really want to have those areas left to grow long. We still need to provide space for the public to be able to play, as well as space for the wildlife. So what I'm hoping to do on some of the larger, more formal open spaces is round the edges where people don't go and play, and underneath trees. Those are the spaces in those more formal places where we'll let the area grow longer. And then we'll probably only cut it once a year, maybe twice a year, depending on how it's looking as the season goes. Then we have other bits of grass which aren't used for formal recreation and could quite easily be left to grow long. and for anything that comes up to flower, because it really will have no impact on people's use of the land. And on those bits is where I see us making the biggest gains in terms of improving the sites for insects and other creatures, for improving the biodiversity. And on those sites, we will stop mowing the whole site, and then wait. And in the first year, I don't intend to put any seed down. I'm planning to just leave it for the first year, see what comes up. And actually, we find on some of the sites, actually, the diversity isn't too bad. And we can then just cut it and rake it off. There might be some sites where actually what it is just a lot of rank grass and not much else. And those areas we might do in the second year, may decide to go in and do maybe a scarify of the land, and then sow some seeds to help improve the diversity. And I would like, what I plan to do, and Helen's more of an expert than I am, so feel free to tell me I'm wrong, but also what I plan to do is use a lot of, where it's appropriate, to put in a lot of yellow rattle, because that will parasitize the grass and help reduce the grass content and help improve the flowering plants. We will also, on those sites, because there is a sense of, I'm aware that with the public, there's a fear of, and people get a bit anxious that we're not managing the sites because it's left to grow long. People think we're just not bothering to look after it. So on each of the sites, I'd like to put a sign on, just explaining why we're doing it, what we're trying to achieve. But also we will probably mow the edges of these sites, probably for ½ a metre, something like that, just so it gives the impression of it looking, I don't like using the word, but tidy, and it is cared for and it's being managed. We also, on some of the sites, we know that people walk across some of these sites and there's desire lines. So in the first month or so, we'll just leave it growing. We'll see where people walk. And then the grounds maintenance team have said they're quite happy when they would normally do their 2 weekly en masse cut, they can just go in and cut those paths so that people can still walk through these sites and appreciate the wildlife and get from A to B, because if we don't mow them, they'll still walk it. So we might as well mow it. Now, the reason why I'm doing this isn't to save money. I don't think it will make much difference financially, because we may cut less, but we will still, but at the end of the season, the job will take longer. So where we save it in cutting, we will then it will make up for that, but costing us more in August, September, because we'll have to go in and cut it with a reciprocating mower and rake it off. I don't really want any site that we cut and leave the horizons on there, because we're not, okay, everything will flower for the insects, but actually you're not really improving the site in terms of diversity. So the plan is to cut, rake, and make habitat piles. If the site is suitable, we will create piles on site, tidy piles, so they're not spreading across the whole of it. If the site isn't big enough or suitable, then the depot have agreed that they will have a trailer where the grass cuttings can be put onto the trailer and taken off site. But we're going to hopefully not do too much of that if we can. The other things that we're doing is, my approach is very community led. Well, I'd like it to be very community led. So at the moment, the sites that I've been picking are ones where I've had community come and talk to me and say, we've got this bit of green open space in our village or in our town. We'd really like to see more wildflowers on it. And when they approach me first, I'm finding there's a lot more of a commitment, a buy-in from the community, because it's them that have said, we'd like it done like this, rather than me going and saying, we're stopping mowing this and this is what we're doing. And they go, oh, nobody's consulted with, nobody's asked us. And it's that feeling of like not feeling in control. So I think we will have to do that in some places, but I'm really going for I'm jumping on the ones where the public come and speak to me and say, can we do this and can you help us? Because then I know there's a commitment. But also what I would really like, and it doesn't have to happen for it to be managed, but I would really like the community to be involved with its management. So in August, September, the depot or myself or somebody will be cutting the site with a reciprocating mower, but I'm planning on buying a bank of tools. I've got a little pot of funding that I've got hanging over, and the plan is to buy a load of rakes and forks and loppers and secateurs and things like that, and then we can then bring them along, and the community can help us rake it up at the end of the season, and then see it develop and grow. And there's also an element of community cohesion can happen there, because people will meet their neighbours and get to know each other. So it could tick a number of boxes all in one go. Where that doesn't happen, where there isn't much involvement from the community, I will then actively approach parish councils and send letters out to the community saying, I'm planning to stop mowing this area, and consult with them in advance, so that we try and bring them along with us. I'm pretty sure that I will receive a number of emails complaining about what we're going to do on some of these sites. But I feel that as long as the majority of the community are behind us, that is fine. If I do come across a lot of objection, the majority is we don't want it done like that, I've got to be careful, and there may be some sites that we just have to accept that we're not quite there yet with them, and maybe we have to concentrate on other areas and then we bring them on. But I'm hoping that won't happen too much. So yeah, that is where we're going with South Norfolk. The same is happening with Broadland. They're a little bit further ahead. I think they have a few more sites than us, but the Broadland are doing the same. And I'm also would be very open on where it's suitable is to plant some trees on some of these sites where it's appropriate. We've got quite a big area in Roydon along a road. We're going to leave that to grow long, but they will accommodate a bit of tree planting. So one section of it, we're planning to plant some native fruit trees, and the community are really keen to have trees that they can get something from. So they want to put in pears and apples, green gage was another one, mulberry, things like that, that they feel that as a community they can go out and get a crop from. So I'm quite keen to do that on where the sites are appropriate. And I think I won't have a standard approach. It will be a very much a site by site basis, and it will have a look at how it's used by the community, what sort of species are on there, and that will help guide us on how we mow it. We might find with some of our sites that in the early days we may have to go in and do an early cut and then do a late cut, just to get some of the bulk off the land, because obviously a lot of these sites have just been mown and mown and mown. We might be lucky on some of them where actually the soil is quite poor anyway, and the grass content's not high, and we get a lot of flowers coming up. So I am aware that we will have to play a little bit by ear in the first few years, whilst we get the sites looking how we would like to get them looking. And I have no objections to sowing seed where it needs to be sowed, and we will purchase that from a reputable source and make sure it's the right sort of seed mix for the location. So that's where we're going, and I'm really keen to work with people in Wymondham, on sites in Wymondham, and I've already had a chat with Greening Wymondham in advance of this and said that I'm really enthusiastic and really keen to pick some sites which they already have sort of highlighted, some sites where we can start this off in Wymondham on sites that we own. Obviously I can't do it on sites that we don't own, but I can always help you talk to people about why it's good, and maybe if they see what we're doing with our land, that will help bring other organisations along with us, and they'll think, oh, it's not quite so bad as we thought it would be, and maybe they will join us and do the same with their land going forward. So that's what we're planning to do at South Norfolk, and fingers crossed it all goes to plan.
Okay, thank you very much, Helen. That's great. Now we go on to Matt.
Oh, hang on a second. Are we going to do questions now
No.
at the end?
Do you want to do questions now, or would you rather wait till the end?
I don't mind.
We'll go on then, Will.
This actually I know the answer to, but I'll let Helen. Georgette has asked, is there a list of council-owned managed green spaces?
Yes. So yes, I have a list. I know what land we own in South Norfolk, but there's also this little there's a web page called My South Norfolk, and if you Google My South Norfolk, it will come up, and there's a little interactive map on there, and there's the bar down the left hand side as you're looking at the screen, and you can tick boxes to bring up different information. So it tells you all about your bin day, it tells you about your democracy, tells you about your boundaries, it tells you everything. But also on there's a section called property, and if you click on property, expand property and go down, there's another subheading on there called property assets. If you click that on the map, everything we own turns blue. And that's a really quick way for you to find out as a member of the public what land we own. Now, there might be some odd ones on there that are property and not community assets. And obviously, if someone inquires, I will soon point you in the right direction for who you need to speak to about that. But if it's a piece of grass and it's on that map, then we own it, and it's me that's managing it most of the time. There'll be the odd one like a common, like Mulbarton Common's not on there, but we don't own it, but we actively manage it with the owner and the parish council. So there's a few oddities, but on a whole, if you go into My South Norfolk, click property assets, you'll see what land we own and we're responsible for.
The next one, Nicola's asking, have you thought about linking this to Plant Life's campaign No Mow May? Did I say that right?
Not yet, but it's something that we probably will start doing. What I'd like to do is get a web page on the South Norfolk website about this project once we've got it sort of fully up and running. And on there, we will then be able to put links to other projects and coincide campaigns at the same time about promotion. There's also a project that runs in South Norfolk called the Beeline, Chet Valley Beeline project. And I'm working with them in Loddon on sites. So I'm already making links with other organisations that have it's the same with Green in Wymondham. I like to work in partnership if I can. One, spread the load, and two, you manage to capture a lot more people. So where I can, I'd like to try and work with organisations to deliver a lot of this work.
Okay, I think that's probably.
Keith had his hand up.
Did he?
Yeah.
Did you have your hand up, Keith?
I did indeed. Can I ask how you're going to deal with all the new developments who tend to have management companies now to manage the area? So it's not South Norfolk; they're all run or controlled by a management maintenance company. Have you got any process in board for dealing with them?
Now, that is going to be an interesting one going forward, because you're right, as South Norfolk Council, we are not adopting any land now from developers unless it's an extreme, unless for sort of under certain circumstances, which will be quite rare. Obviously, we won't have any control over these management companies, but so there's a bit of work that probably needs to happen there in the background about if there's any way that we can influence those management companies, whether we can talk to them in the early days about management of spaces, whether the community could set up a little group that would liaise with those management companies. I don't know, but it is going to be an interesting one, because obviously the council years ago used to adopt all the public open spaces from developments, and that's not happening anymore. So anything new coming online, we won't be able to directly manage ourselves, but we need to find a way of helping to influence those management companies. Not sure how that will happen at the moment.
Suzanne, you've got a question?
Yes, thank you for that. I wanted to ask Helen, is there any scope for maybe allocating allotments? Because I know in Wymondham we have a big waiting list for allotments, and people seem to be a lot more into the grow your own food side of things, you know, rightly so. Are there any sort of proposals about that? The other thing I wanted to say is that at District Council, I'm on a committee where we're looking at village clusters and possible development in various villages. This is more of a comment, really. Every meeting I find myself complaining that they're going to take out hedgerows and more trees. I don't know if you have any sway in that direction at all, but it incenses me that if anyone is going to redevelop land, it invariably means ripping up hedgerows and trees.
Yeah.
So that's it, really.
What was the first part?
If there's any plans to have allotments.
So yeah, not at the moment, but I know that parish council, I know in some parishes where they've had developments, they've requested that some of the land is given over so they can create allotments. So instead of creating just a public open space or a play area, one of those spaces could be allocated for allotment land. I know, is it Poingland's done that?
There is one on our South Norfolk estate as well.
Yeah, so and I think that needs to be done at parish level when you're inputting into the planning application side. If you're consulted as a parish council or town council, you could start putting in comments about land is required for allotments, and maybe that would then filter through to the planning when the land is allocated over. Now, in terms of so the second part about ripping up, that really I can sort of have an influence through by talking to people in the planning department, but Robin Taylor is the best person to talk to at South Norfolk, because he will have input into planning decisions and conditions and things that can and can't happen. So Robin's your key in terms of the planning on those side of things.
I can see you've got your hand up, Keith, but actually I'm quite anxious to move things on. So if you could hang on to your question till the end,
That's fine.
then I think, it makes things simpler. So Matt, if you're okay, can we do your talk now?
Yeah, are you able to enable sharing? Because I've got a PowerPoint presentation and it says you can do that. When I click on the button to share the screen, it says host disable participant screen sharing.
That's what I had.
Is that something you can resolve? I've got a PowerPoint.
I think Mike's doing something about it, maybe.
I'll just try to alter one of the options under the multiple participants can share, but that's simultaneously.
Eddie says click on security. The option is there.
All right.
Oh, it's come up. Here we go.
Oh,
All right.
How's that?
Hey.
Yes.
You see it?
You did better than me.
I might have to get my wife here. Can you see that?
Yes.
Brilliant.
Oh, fantastic.
Off you go, Matt.
Right. Hello, everybody. I'm Matt. I work for the Norwich Fringe project, and I've been asked to talk about community engagement. I've used the title Working Together, the Power of Community Engagement and Volunteering. I've got a few slides, and hopefully the slides and the photos will sort of demonstrate what I'm trying to get at, really. And you can see here's our volunteers, the Fringe project volunteers. Sort of some are having lunch around the fire and others are doing a bit of work and putting a kissing gate on. That's one of Helen's sites at Case to Roman Town. Just a bit about the Fringe project. I've been in the job since '98. And before that, it started in 1991 as a local authority funded partnership project. The aim of the project really is to look after the countryside around Norwich, Greater Norwich now, with the focus of working with volunteers and community groups. I'm funded by, Norwich City Council is the lead and employing partner, and I also do work and funding for Broadland and South Norfolk and for Helen really and her sites. I look after about 50 odd natural areas in the City Council. I support Helen and Jamie at Broadland on their sites. So the overall aim is to engage with local people really and involve them in the countryside. There's an active photo there. That might be at Ketts Park, actually, a year or so ago, doing some woodland work. I'm going to divide it into two areas, my talk about volunteers and how I work with volunteers. The first area is going to be about the Norwich Fringe Project volunteers. And then the second area is about sort of how I work with friends groups and community groups, really, and how we make them sort of more independent in working. The Fringe Project volunteers started about 10 years ago, and I got approached by lots of different people saying, can I come and help you, Matt? Can I come and be outside doing practical work? And we came up with developing the Fringe volunteers, and we have them on a Wednesday, Thursday and Fridays going out to various sites, led directly by myself and one of my colleagues, the project assistant, who supports the volunteers. And it works really well. We have about, so I'll start again. With COVID, it has stopped things, unfortunately. And at the moment, the volunteers are on hold due to restrictions. But as soon as we get back on our feet, we'll be out again. So I just done some headings there about the volunteers. Why do people volunteer? Well, I think it's a sense of purpose. I've got a good sort of analogy is that some of the partners of people that come out to me saying, thank goodness that they found you, because when they retired, they didn't really have a purpose anymore. They'd stopped work and didn't know what to do with themselves. And then they found the Fringe project and they're sort of out doing stuff and feeling, you know, valued again. Some people come out for environmental reasons to sort of help improve and look after the countryside and for biodiversity and conservation. It's a feeling of ownership and belonging, socialising, making new friends, and not being alone. I've had quite a few volunteers who've retired, and you know, work was their life, and then they haven't got a family or anything. Now they come out and they, you know, got a new family, I suppose, of the Fringe project. So who comes out? Well, I mentioned retired people. We have a lot of retired people who come out, and we have people in their, like in their 70s. We have an ex-fireman. We've got sort of people high up in companies. We have people looking for a change of career who want to come out and try something new. Paula, who works for me for the past 15 years, used to be a nurse, and then she changed career in her 50s to become a countryside officer. Students, and also I think looking at restoring people's mental health. There's a lot of people who get quite stressed in life and have, you know, anxiety issues or stress, low self-esteem, low confidence. And it's amazing, you see the difference in people when they come out and volunteer with us, and how nature and doing something practical and being with other people, you know, improves people. And there's bereavement and grief. We've had people who've suffered bereavement, lost a loved one. And again, it's a way of making new friends, being out and about. What we provide with the volunteers is we provide a uniform, we provide sort of safety equipment, so safety boots, hard hats, a saw. We provide equipment and training and developing people. I put people on brush cutter courses and wood chipper courses and mower courses so that they become, you know, part of the team. We provide fulfillment. I think people get a lot of fulfillment coming out and being outside. A lot of fun, new skills, and more importantly, we provide tea, coffee, and biscuits. And as a reward to everybody, we provide Christmas lunch as well. So how many volunteers do we have? Well, the Fringe project, we have about 27 regular volunteers on the books now. And, you know, through COVID, we've developed about 16 reserve volunteers as well. And as soon as we can get back outside, we'll do like a taster day for the reserve people and get more people out, really. The volunteers become like a family as well, I find, when I work with them. It's really nice to have them out and you get to know them quite well. So the benefits, I've got a professional estate team, really. I've been able to train up people, and it's amazing what we can do. I'll show you some slides in a minute. And the in-kind annual sort of contribution I've worked out based on about, I think it's a £50 or £150 per volunteer, is about £150,000 worth of in-kind contribution in terms of volunteers coming out. So the next slide, I'm going to do this. So just a few examples here of the work that we do to give you a flavour out on site. We have a lot of people who are skilled. You know, every day's a school day for me. A lot of these people know what they're doing, and we just give them the tools and the ability to do it. And the beauty is that these volunteers that come out with me, once I've trained them up or they've got the skills themselves, they can pass on their knowledge to everyone else. And it's really exciting to see that in action. You can see we're doing a squeeze style there on Marston Marshes, and there's a fence at the back, doing a stock fence to keep the cows from escaping. So we do a lot of different things. The previous slide was Marston Marshes down at Eton. This slide now is Swarston Common, one of Helen Sibley's sites. And this is wildflower meadow management. On Swarston, we do some with a tractor and a hay crop, but we've got a small area of wildflowers with yellow rattle, 5 different orchids, marsh meadow, was it marsh?
Marigolds.
Not marsh marigold, what's the, marsh thistle, that's it. Marsh thistle on there. And we've got the volunteers there, and we use the brush cutters that they're trained on to cut the grass, then we rake it off by hand. And yeah. So moving on to sort of like the wider picture of like other groups that I work with across sort of my work we have about 6 friends groups in the city that I work with and support and manage, I suppose. And they work on sort of 6 different city council sites. And then we also work with Green in Wymondham, more recently the Lizard, and there's places in Broadland as well that I work with community groups up there really. And the idea of this is that we enable the groups to, I support them and I provide advice and training so that they can manage themselves really over time and go out and be independent from the Fringe projects. Whereas the Norwich Fringe project volunteers, they come to me and I lead and I manage that group and I take them out. Whereas these sort of groups, friends groups, we try and encourage them to be more independent really. So we're providing support and encouragement. We provide training and learning and development. So for example, I've put members of groups on first aid courses or on leadership training and health and safety courses so they can learn the skills to support and manage their group really, without me having to be there all the time. We've also enabled, I've supported groups by getting people in to help fundraise as well for the groups. I've got an organisation called Conservation Volunteers, and I paid them last year to go in and support some of our friends groups in the city, like at the Friends of Ketts Heights, the Old Library Wood Collective, the Friends of Danby Wood and others, to raise, and we raised about £30,000 between 3 groups from the Awards for All scheme. So there's lots of different things you can do. Provide the expertise, support and advice. If we're on the site working with the groups, we can provide the tools and equipment and the safety equipment as well. I think it's providing the confidence for groups to work independently with limited or no support. So, and also with volunteer groups, I think that in the city we do, and Green Wymondham's an example as well, is that the volunteers can actually manage areas themselves really. I think it's important to put systems in place though to make sure groups are supported, because they still need a person there, an organisation to support the groups and encourage them and give them advice when they need it really. I'll give you a case study, Old Library Wood at Rosary Road, and I'd be more than happy to meet people up there and show you around this particular site, and I know the group would be really welcome opportunity to show off what they've done. It's quite an exciting one. This is back in 2017 when I took on the City Council's natural areas. This was one of my first project really my manager gave me. There was a big issue at Old Library Wood. It's in a sort of mixed area of quite relatively affluent people and people without money. And there was issues of antisocial behaviour, prostitution and drug taking, which I did witness myself on the site. And the community felt that they didn't have ownership of the site, that it was being used not for nice things really. And so we came together with the Old Library Wood Collective, who set up from the community, and I worked with them right from the start in developing a management plan, the site, a work plan. We came together and we looked at how we could develop the site for the community, working with the police as well to resolve issues. It's a really exciting project and it's still ongoing. And the initial sort of work I was doing was supporting the group myself and helping them to deliver stuff on the ground by bringing the tools and the equipment in, but at the same time providing the training I mentioned earlier, like with TCV, providing the leadership training and health and safety training so that they can become independent over time, which they have done now really. And I do less sort of practical work on site with them. They tend to do more themselves really. This project here we resurfaced a path on your top right hand screen, and the gentleman with the star on his t-shirt and the sort of dreadlocks, a guy called Crispin, and he lives on Rosary Road, and he's part of the Old Library Wood Collective, and it's one of my volunteers on the left in the yellow high-vis. And Crispin's actually, I'll show you the next slide, we put some benches in, and in between the 2 benches there's actually now a library, and Crispin built a library for adults. It's a book swap library, so people turn up and they put books in there and then take them away. And there's one for children as well on the site. It's really exciting. And to be honest, we thought it was going to get burned down, but it's been there 3 years. So it's pretty good, really. We've also, the group raised money for sculptures, and they put some sculptures of animals around the site made out of wood. We've done a mural, and there's lots of other things going on there. It's a really good site to get inspiration from, I think, to go and have a look at for ideas and see what people are doing. Not far off now. I just thought it really important to mention the good work we do with Anne, Peter, Tony, others, the team from Greening Wymondham. So I'm working in partnership with Greening Wymondham, Wymondham Town Council, to help Greening Wymondham to manage the woodland at Ketts Park Woodland, which we've been doing for about the past 3 or 4 years. It's really exciting. There's a lovely photo there. I got involved because they wanted someone to come and help with the chainsaw and help manage and sort of provide the skills really with the group, train up the group so they could manage the site really. And that's what we've been doing. I wrote a management plan for the site, and then we got a felling license because of the woodland work we're doing from the Forestry Commission. And then over the winter, we have regular work days. We've got into a really good sort of regime now of managing the site and doing a lot of sort of pollarding the willow trees, coppicing, thinning out. So it's really exciting. You can see some familiar faces there in the next slide of people, maybe in their younger days.
You cheeky.
It's quite strange because normally you get a bit of feedback when you try and say funny things, but everyone's on mute. So you can see they're doing some tree work. And this was, I think, the first year of doing work on site, really, and coppicing the willow, because the site had been planted in the 1990s, and it sort of was growing and maturing, and it was starting to fight the light. The light wasn't getting into the woodland. So we basically opened up light to get diversity and get an age structure of the woodland, and it's quite exciting to see the difference now. There's also a couple of woodland glades, and the volunteers in the summer are mowing those off, by themselves with brush cutters. Could we put them some brush cutter course? Provided a training to train up the groups so they can do things independently of myself. And the path that Anne and others fundraised for was put in over, I think, a couple of years ago. And in the first winter, we had a few teething problems because of the area is quite clay, and the flood the path did flood in a few places. So the town council very kindly gave us some money to pay for materials, and the volunteers here, I just hired some equipment, and this is all volunteers that you can see in the photos. The people on the right hand side of Andy and Peter from Greening Wymondham, and the guys on the left hand side, Keith and Ian from the Fringe project. So we sort of worked together to support Greening Wymondham to raise the path. And it was a really good project. It was very hot when we did it. And finally, we moved to the Lizard Trust. As a result of the work I've been doing at Ketts Park Woodland, made connections with the Lizard Trust, and we're out there doing work on site. And we got invited to come and do a day, and I managed to bring, I think we had about 30 volunteers that day. We had about sort of 15 Norwich Fringe Project volunteers, and the rest were made up by Lizard Trust volunteers, and again, Greening Wymondham. And we managed to sort of open up do a bit of habitat management work. I think the aim is to come back and do some hedge laying in the future. But it's just, it's great that we can bring people together, share ideas, share skills. I think COVID's important to mention because of what's been happening. We've had lockdown 3 times, and I know many of my volunteers are quite frustrated because they've not been able to come out because of the restrictions we've had, and we've had to stop volunteering, which is really sad. But I know that people are really keen to come out, but I think that we need to be aware of the effects of lockdown on people's mental health, people's well-being, and see how important sort of doing voluntary work and being outside in the outdoor environment is. It's important being together, being in the great outdoors, and there's a need for volunteers, and it's a purpose for people as well. One thing I noticed about lockdown is how, in particular Master Road, how much that increased in usage really. We must have had about 200-300% increase in the number of people using it. So more people are visiting the outdoors because they've got that need, that want to go out there really, especially this time. So finally, the final slide, I just wanted to put in some, it's all about working together. It's about the team. It's about the volunteers. This is on one of Helen Sibley's sites at Caister Roman Town, and Helen often gives us difficult projects, and this is replacing an old wooden step project. We were using plastic, and we do use a lot of plastic on our sites now because it's recyclable and it's longer than timber really, and it's durable. And you can see the happy faces. We have a real mix of people, from all walks of life who come out, and to be honest, the you know, the stuff that we do now is amazing. Anyway, I think I've talked quite a bit. I hope that is of interest, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Matt. Can you take your screen off?
Yeah, how do we do that? There we go.
I don't know. Now we've got a blank screen.
Well,
Gone wrong. Oh, there we are. It's okay. So are there any questions for Matt now, or we can hang on to them to the end if there aren't any? No, I think we'll wait. If you'd be happy to wait till the end, Matt, we'll deal with questions then. Okay, Helen Baczkowska, can you come in and do your piece, please?
She was trying to.
Yes, I'm just trying to get my screen to share. There we go. As ever, these things always take a second, don't they? Right, there we go. I'll try and be brief, so because it feels like we're probably going to have quite a lot of things to chat about, so I won't take up your time by chatting for too long, and then can ask questions perhaps if anything's not clear. So most of you will know about the work that Norfolk Wildlife Trust does with our nature reserves, especially places like Clyde that have got visitor centres, and near Wymondham there's Ashwellthorpe and New Buckingham Common that you can visit. We also do a lot of work beyond the nature reserves in the wider countryside, and that work, it really falls into sort of a number of different categories. So there's commenting on development and dealing with forward planning. There's advisory work, which is where I sort of fit in, providing advice to landowners. And we also do a lot of strategic work. So, for example, at the minute, we're working with Southampton University to look at some habitat connectivity mapping. So this is like identifying areas in the county where there are the best opportunities of reconnecting fragmented habitats across the landscape. And that's something that, once we finish the project, we'll be able to sort of use to help communities. Unfortunately, I'm really struggling to access my mapping system with working from home. My broadband just isn't up to complicated things. So I've got a map of Wymondham here, but it doesn't tell you very much other than it's Wymondham. So we've had a long-standing involvement in Wymondham and with working with Anne and others within Greening Wymondham. And I just thought I'd very sort of quickly run through what some of those are. So in 2004, we supported our local group, the Wymondham Wildlife Group Wing, Wymondham Nature Group, to produce a wildlife audit. And that is available if anybody wants a copy of it, because it's quite a good idea of what wildlife there was at the time within Wymondham, and probably most of it's still there, and the areas where it's living. We also were involved in the previous Green Infrastructure Group, which was looking at opportunities for reconnecting habitats, but also creating new sort of amenity space within Wymondham. And that group isn't in existence at the moment, but should it come back into play, we'd be really happy to sort of be part of that again. And I just wanted to very quickly sort of talk about some of the sites. So we've got Moot Hill here. This is a county wildlife site, and there's quite a lot of county wildlife sites within Wymondham. So these sites sit just below SSSI. So you've got SSSIs as the sort of nationally protected, and they're the best areas of wildlife in the county, and they meet sort of national criteria. And then underneath that, we've got all the rest of the sites that are sort of county importance for wildlife. And very often they're really just as good as the SSSIs. But with something like Heathland, you can only notify as a SSSI your sort of top 5% of heathland in the county. So you could still have a load of other heathland that's really great. So that's where we pick it up through the county wildlife site system. So we've got Moot Hill, which you can see near the railway. We've got the Lizard down here, and the dismantled railway is all part of a county wildlife site. There's the Abbey Meadows over here where the ruins are. There's Tolls Meadow and Friars Field either side of the river there, and a number of others sort of just beyond the Wymondham boundary. So you've got some amazing assets already within Wymondham, which you know, are the beginnings of doing any kind of work of reconnecting habitats, really. I thought I'd talk a little bit about the science behind this, because I think it really helps people to understand where it's coming from. So this is the area east of Long Stratton, and you've got a number of sites here. So the big green splodge is the SSSI at Fritton Common. So that's a site of special scientific interest, and there's another one here within Tyrrell's Wood. The pink areas are county wildlife sites. So you can see already you've got sort of 2 sites of special scientific interest, and then in between them you've got 2 county wildlife sites. So you can imagine something like a Barbastell bat is already starting to use these corridors across the landscape. We've also got these red lines, which are roadside nature reserves. And one of the things we've been doing with these is these are very vulnerable little sites, because they are literally right on the edge of the road. But they are fantastic for some really unusual species. And I was busy making notes when the other Helen was talking, because what we've been doing is running a project for 10 years now, collecting seed off of these nature reserves to re-establish new meadows elsewhere. And I'd be really happy to talk to you, Helen, if you're going to sort of think about seeding wildlife areas, then don't buy seed. We'll look at actually collecting wild seed. And there's a huge amount of benefits to this. We've got some quite unusual species that live on these verges that are often not in commercial seed mixes. We also find that by collecting the seed, we're actually collecting species that never get put in commercial seed mixes, often because the seed is too difficult to handle. So things like lesser stitchwort, carnation sedge, common sedge, hairy sedge, they're often not in a commercial seed mix because there's no demand for them and the seed's difficult and expensive to handle. But the other thing we find is that we get an incredibly long flowering season, because it's wild seed. It's not all grown to be harvested at the same time of year. So it's quite a different picture that we end up with. So these are the kind of building blocks across the landscape, and where we're really taking our work now is to actually look at how we reconnect these through creating new meadows, planting hedges, planting trees, and really identifying the best places that we can do that. Here's some cute wildlife pictures just because they're nice. It does illustrate what I'm saying. So hedgehogs, very, very endangered at the moment. They forage over an area of 10 to 20 hectares. They will travel 2 kilometres in a night foraging for food. So the hedgehog that you see in your garden might well travel over a really big area. So they need that big interconnected landscape in order to survive. Same for pipistrelle bats, and even built up areas often have pipistrelle bats. They forage over an area of 25 to 50 hectares. So they need really big areas to survive. And barn owls forage over a similar area to hedgehogs and travel similar kind of distances. And like hedgehogs, they rely on rough grassland and hedges. So it's not just trees, but it is exactly the sort of meadows and the rough grassland that Helen was talking about, and the hedgerows as well. And all 3 of these species were found in that 2004 wildlife audit for Wymondham. So these aren't things that exist somewhere out in the countryside beyond your town. These were noticed, you know, within or on the fringes of Wymondham. So really we have to ask the question, great, where do we go from here? How do we make all this happen? We have got some ideas coming up for some new projects. One of those we're looking at, and it will chime with some of what Matt and Helen were saying, is we're looking at a community hub to provide more support to community groups. And that might be in the form of training, and it might be in the form of chances to network and share across the county. So, you know, it will be something that's really useful, I think, for community groups to tap into. We are also continuing to work with landowners, not just on county wildlife sites, but on sites that are in between county wildlife sites or sites that sort of connect them. And there's some very simple principles. The simplest principle is that the bigger area you have available for wildlife, the more wildlife you will have. And that's not just more species, but more individuals within that species. So the population is more robust. It's more robust to disease. It's more robust to other impacts on it. And that's really what sits behind what we're doing here. So the other opportunities we look at is for chances to buffer and connect and create new habitats within new developments. And when there's planning applications come in, so we look at those quite closely now and can suggest ways that wildlife can be incorporated into new developments. And I mean, one example might be the proposed sort of developments around Long Stratton. We worked quite closely with the landscape architects who were developing the master plan, and looking at things, where are the best corridors for wildlife going to be, and how do we make sure those come about? Where do we source the seeds from? If we're going to plant trees, what trees actually already exist in the local hedges that we could emulate within the tree planting, so it's not just an off-the-shelf mix, because that will be a better benefit to local wildlife. Helen's talked about the management of green spaces. I think that's really crucial, management of amenity spaces, because that often is the land that lies between these good sites. And the final thing is coming down to a garden level, and it's not just about individual gardeners, it's about how perhaps gardeners can work together at a street or neighbourhood level. And I just put these two projects up because they're really good examples. So the Wild Patch was an initiative by the South Yare Wildlife Group to get everybody to create a wildlife patch within their garden. And everybody was given a little sign and a little bit of support to get going with that. It's on their website if you want to look at it. I'm sure they'd be really happy to talk to you. They're only over in Claxton, which is Rockland in the Broads. So it's the South Norfolk part of the Broads. And this is just one of their signs here. And I just think it's a really nice initiative, in that, as Helen was saying earlier, if you show that you intend to manage an area for wildlife and it's not just abandoned, I think it makes a really big difference. And so a little plaque like this in your garden can actually make all the difference. But very often neighbourhoods need to work together, because not everybody can have everything in their garden. If you've got young children, you might not want a pond, fair enough. But actually you don't need to have all those things in one garden. But at a street level, has somebody got a bit of scrub? Has somebody got a pond? Those sort of things are a really good way of looking at it. And the Hedgehog Highway project is a really fabulous project. And hedgehogs are really impacted by concrete or brick walls. And this sort of fencing now, where you have larch lap fencing, but underneath it's on a concrete plinth. And the hedgehogs can't get through. There's no way for them through it. And there's a big initiative to get people to put holes. You only need a hole the size of a CD between gardens, and put a plaque on it so it says Hedgehog Highway. There's a fantastic website called Hedgehog Street that has all this information in it, and I don't want to duplicate it because their information is the best. If you're doing community events, they've got some fabulous videos, and in fact Wild Patch has as well. They've both got little animations that show the wildlife benefit of this kind of connectivity work. So it goes from everything from these strategic levels, from planning, right down to what you can do in your own backyard. There's something to do at every level. So I will stop screen sharing and put myself on mute, and we can
put yourself on mute. Lovely, good. Well, I haven't got any questions coming up on chat. I mean, I'm inclined to go to gallery view, actually. Tony, can we do that? And let people ask questions by whatever, putting their hands up or whatever. And it's difficult for me to spot people who are putting their hands up. Or just say something if you've got a question.
Hello, I've got a question.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask our three speakers, do you have any suggestions for community engagement while we're in lockdown? How we can encourage people to do hedgehog highways and plant trees, etc. Anyone?
Any of our speakers got any ideas on that?
Well, I would say with the hedgehog stuff, the information online is fabulous. So start sharing it so people know. There is a project in Oxford called Hedge Ox, haha, which I'm sure if you wanted to get in touch with them, they would be really happy to tell you what they've been doing. I think they actually bought themselves a large and powerful drill, and they just go out in pairs, I think, from a household, and literally will say, you know, can we come around your house and just create a hedgehog highway for you?
That's a good idea.
So, you know, that's something that the two people who do it are probably from the same household, or if not, they're outside anyway. So, you know, but I think now people are chafing at the bit to get out there and do something. So it's giving them this information so that when we can, they're ready to hit the ground running.
I can see that Annette, one of our councillors, has actually got a hedgehog highway plaque.
Good for you.
Well done.
Keith, you had a question a while back or something. Carry on.
It's just to follow up what Helen was saying. We were talking about the open greenfield areas and obviously the development areas. Where we are on the Birchlake development in Wymondham, one of the things that has been put into the under the Section 106 agreement, I believe, is the provision of orchard and allotments. Now, these are the sort of things I think that the South Norfolk or the others should be putting in place in the earlier development to make sure these open spaces are available. And I must give credit to South Norfolk for the Birchgate development we're on. I think it's one of the best greenfield sites we've seen. It's very open and there's a lot of infrastructure there for wildlife passages through backwards and forwards and keeping some of the open environment. But the key thing is to do with the development. If we can get these allotments and these orchards in place at the early stages from the district councils, that's where we start from. And some of them now are just basically just little boxes stuck into places. So I'll give credit to South Norfolk. Birchgate, I think, is a good example of what can be achieved, or sorry, in Birchgate, what can be achieved in other developments.
And I think to a certain degree that comes down to planning as well and pushing things through, but it also depends on the developer. If you've got a developer that's happy to work with you and do those green initiatives and are keen to do them, then they'll deliver them. Yeah. And if they don't see it as onerous and something, oh God, we're being made to do it, then they will. But if they've got an interest and their company is very much promotes itself on being a green builder, then they're going to do it. I'm sure there's some developers out there that basically they do the bare minimum to get the houses up and get them sold. And I suppose it's trying to get other house builders to match some of these ones with far better, higher aspirations for a green approach. So as we can see, it can be done.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to know how much of an impact it had on their profit margin doing that. I'd like to think probably didn't have much difference, but I think there's a perception sometimes that it will, and it's changing that attitude that making something green and good for wildlife doesn't necessarily have to cost you more money. It just means you have to think about it in a slightly different way and probably think about it earlier in your design process rather than, at the end go, we haven't really done anything for wildlife, we better tag that on, and then it never really ever works properly. Whereas if you do it right from the beginning, and a little bit of something that's happening at South Norfolk is we've got the developing an environment strategy, and there's a group of us in the council that meet regularly now from different departments about pushing through about initiatives that we're working on that can work towards the green initiative. Robin Taylor from planning sits on there, myself and a colleague from our community assets sit on there. We have different people that come in and work on that. So we'd like to think that as projects become available, we'll start to work with those. And I think good cases like that, you talk about that developer, that's something that Robin will be aware of, and where he can, he tries to push things like that forward. But obviously sometimes it can't always, we can't always manage it, but where we can, we do try to.
Okay, thank you.
I see that Penny would like to ask something, and I could just say that Georgette pointed out that toads can use the hedgehog holes as well. Okay, Penny.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to link up the conversation here with both the Helens actually, because and including Georgette Vale Toad Watch, is a lot of our wildlife gets killed on our roads. So what is the position on an initiative to actually create nature highways under the roads of Norfolk so toads can travel safely, all sorts of wildlife? I appreciate that's like not just South Norfolk, that's county as well. But I think a coordinated group could actually achieve something wonderful for the nature in Norfolk. What's your perspective on that, please?
Personally, I think it's a brilliant idea, and I wish we could have more wildlife highways under our roads. Unfortunately, I don't. Roads are a county thing. They're very much a county thing. I suppose within housing estates, that's something that comes towards the district, but that is very much in the planning department, and that's where we would. Once again, that's where we'd have to push things at the planning stage for those things to happen. Fortunately, in my department, we don't have quite that level of influence, but it is something that actually it's quite interesting you say that, because it's not something we've talked about yet in our environmental strategy meetings, but it's something worth just talking about so that everybody in the group has it in our head, and then when we're it's something that Robin can talk about as well. So it's a valid point, and it's something that we should think about more, definitely.
Georgette, did you want to speak?
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I was at a toad symposium, and there was a speaker who was a counsellor, and she also volunteered for the badgers as well, because there's a fair amount of links. So I'm not the only one that's crossed the species barrier. And she said, she apologised and said she unashamedly got through a wildlife corridor in a planning permission request, because she said, I got it through on the hedgehogs, because she said, I know that if I'd have gone to people and said, we want to save the toads, they say, yeah, nasty, horrible, slimy things. Of course, they're not. If she said, well, it would actually help the badgers, they'd say, disease-ridden, horrible, don't want them. So she said, hedgehogs are everybody's friend, so she got it through on that, but at least she got it through.
Yeah, it's just knowing how to play the system, work the system. It's knowing how best to hang some of these things. Where's the best place to hang them to get them through? Sometimes it'd be a barn owl, sometimes it'd be a head. It's just being a bit thinking a bit smarter sometimes about how.
Yeah, I mean, barn owls are a great one because they're beautiful, aren't they? And it's always a thrill. No matter how often you see a barn owl, it's still a thrill to see one. But actually, when you are creating or managing habitat for wildlife, for barn owls, what you're actually doing is creating habitat for voles, you know, and probably if you started saying, well, actually, you know, we want somewhere where mice and voles can live, people might turn their noses up, but actually that's what you need. And I mean, we tend to use these sort of flagship species quite a lot, and sort of saying that across the countryside, if we had better hedges and margins beside those hedges, a couple of meters each side of rough grassland, the benefits for wildlife would be phenomenal. The thing people will see will be the barn owl. The things they won't see will be the mice and the bats and the snakes and the reptiles and everything else that will be living there. So yeah, it's a good point, Georgette. Yeah.
Can I also add to Penny's point, and I know doesn't always work out, the idea of having tunnels underneath the roads. Most animals don't want to go down tunnels underneath roads. The best things would be the wildlife bridges, where they're wide enough so that a wide variety of things can go across, not just a footpath up in the air that no wildlife would want to be seen dead on, but actually a bridge that's got trees and hedges and things on it, and humans can walk across it too if they like. But tunnels underneath roads, not many self-respecting wildlife would go under a great big tunnel.
I mean, on that subject, Georgette, we've very, very early days, so don't get overexcited. We've started a bit of a discussion with the Highways Agency about the possibility of a green bridge across the A11.
Excellent.
I mean, they've got to look at how feasible it is as a civil engineering project. You know, they've got to look at the existing bridges and look at where it's possible. So it's very early days, but we've mooted the point to them and they haven't run away screaming over the hill yet. So, you know, and I just think, you know, if we could have a green bridge at Right Up Lane going over to Silfield, it would just be so different for people and wildlife. So fingers crossed.
Great, exciting. Would that be for, I mean, that is a bridge that's used a lot by people. So yeah. Would they make it bigger or something? Is that the idea?
That's the discussion. That's where the discussion's got to go. So they've got to look at what's there and see, could it be adapted to have maybe a slightly wider platform that would just have a hedge across it, for example, something like that. But as it stands, you know, it's not a space that wildlife is going to cross over because it's too vulnerable.
It's not even if humans like crossing over, I can tell you.
No, but if you know, if it was a metre or two wider and that extra space was a hedge and a bit of a road verge, then actually things would cross over it, and that's all it would take. Whether it's feasible or not, I don't know, but the Highways Agency are currently putting quite a lot of money into infrastructure improvements for biodiversity. So this has come from them saying, has anybody in the country got some really good projects? And the Wildlife Trusts have put forward a number of green bridges as a suggestion.
Excellent. Right, are we kind of running out of steam now? Decided we've had enough.
Can I speak?
Yes,
please. Just talking about that area on the Lizard side of Right Up Lane, in the plans, there is an area put aside for a community orchard and an area put aside for allotments. But how they would be allocated or how trees would be chosen for the community orchard at present, I've no idea.
You want to probably get together. Do you have does that area
Helen, can you turn your sound up at all?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, right, bear with me. Bear with me.
Very faint.
Let me see, how do I do that? Is that any better?
Yes.
All right, okay. So if you in the area you were talking about, do you have my mic's in the wrong place. There we go. Technology. It's getting late. So in the area that you're talking about, do you have a community group, or do you have like a community Facebook page?
This is a wild area at present. This is
okay.
This is
but I'm just thinking
the last area to be developed.
Keith is the answer to this, I think.
All right.
Come on, Keith. Mike. Audio.
Keith.
Keith, unmute. That's it.
I'm unmuted now. It is one of the latter stages of the development of Birchgate. All the other trees and shrubs and everything else have been specified under the green space design and everything else. They're all laid down, but certainly the allotments in the orchard, there's no specific details of plants or trees allocation at this stage that I'm or know of, on all the plans and everything else I've put out. So that's something that might need to be developed maybe through South Norfolk or whatever with the developers when we come to that latter stages of the plans.
Right.
Can I just add to that? I think that there was a list of the trees that they were going to have. I don't know if maybe Keith has overlooked it, but I'm pretty sure I looked at a list of trees, because one of them was some kind of Turkish tree, and I thought, oh, that's interesting, because you know it's harping back to my background. But I thought that there was a list, and they were trying to look at more native trees to put in that area. So I think it's just a work in progress at the moment.
But who might it be work in progress with, I wonder?
planets.
This is between the developers and South Norfolk, because basically the agreement as part of the planning application is, with regard to trees and everything else, is between the two, South Norfolk and the developers, as to what goes there. As Suzanne was saying, I haven't seen that. I've seen trees and shrubs and bulbs and all the wildflowers for the rest of the development. Well, I haven't seen that one yet, but there are so many documents out there, I might have missed it.
Could I just ask a question? So when those allotments are in place there, who's going to be managing allocating the land to residents? Who will oversee that? Is that going to Wymondham Town Council, or is it going to be, or are you going to have to set up a group of your own?
As part of the thing, as you said, South Norfolk do not adopt any of the estate unless there is an estate management company put in place, which there will be within the part of my development. It's Giles Landscaping, but another part of the development is another landscaping management company, and there might be others. So it gets very complicated if who's managing each particular area.
You know, you have oh, sorry.
Right, carry on.
See, I think with these situations, I know that some places, this is slightly going off piece slightly, I do apologize, but quickly, I know some communities have set up their own management companies and manage it themselves rather than somebody else, rather than that management company. So they set up their own little company, and it's their own community company, and they hire a company in to do their work, but they can control it, and they control how it's managed.
The way it's managed on this development is that Giles Landscape have been allocated or have the contract taking place, which I believe in our situation will be in the spring. We, as all the householders, will pay an annual fee to them to manage the development. As part of it, when they get on board, they will be asking for a community group to be set up.
Right, good.
Communicate with them, so that if we want anything special, we can add some of our money will be used for future developments and such like. But as we haven't got that in place yet, I've seen no contract or the procedures we've put in place.
Okay.
I can only assume that they will deal with the allotments, the orchards and everything else. But whether it's the same company, I don't know. We're Giles. If you go to the Hopkins development, they have another management company. And that's where it's going to get a little bit complicated with who does what.
Helen, I think Whispering Oaks might be interesting because the site, the play area, is it Verbena Drive? There's a large area of land there which Penny knows about, and I think one of Greening Wyndham's projects could be looking at not actually doing it themselves, but there are a lot of residents on Whispering Oaks who are interested in this area, and if it's possible to do something with that area, you know, that may be when we will have to work with the management company. I'm only just speaking off the top of my head here of what I know at the moment.
Yeah.
Could I ask a question on another matter, just a quick one from, I think, Helen S. It's about urban trees. I'm interested in the idea of having more trees actually in the town. Are there any areas that you might have found that might be suitable that South Norfolk are responsible for?
Yeah. So we're working with Norfolk County Council with the tree resilient strategy project about planting the trees, and the district councils are kind of signing into that and buying into that. So we have got a commitment to plant X amount of trees by X date. And we now need to find ways of delivering that target. Now,
you're not looking.
A lot of our open spaces are, some of our places already play areas with trees on, so we can't plant lots of other trees on those spaces because they're not really suitable. And then our countryside sites, most of them are already really wooded, and in some of those sites I'm actually thinning out trees because it's good woodland management. So I'm almost in negative equity already before I've even started planting my trees. So I am looking at places where I can start planting trees now. Where we put can we start adding some hedges into places, because in effect they are trees. So I haven't earmarked any major places in Wymondham yet, but I am aware that I need to be finding some. we're also going to be thinking about any other landowners that we can work with to plant some trees to hit some of our targets as well. And we're also working with the South Norfolk tree wardens about projects, and they're helping us to, they're going to be working with us to deliver a lot of this work. But actual sites in Wymondham, I haven't earmarked any major sites yet. It might be that we just add odd trees here and there. But that we haven't got a site that we can go, oh, we just plant loads of trees on there. And that is my biggest issue actually at the moment, is finding sites to plant trees. One of my thoughts is, can we convince the council to buy a piece of land that we plant up and becomes a community woodland? But I think that's a little bit in the future. That would be lovely. I think that might be a little way in the future yet, though.
Okay.
Oh, thank you, Helen. Thank you.
Mary, have you got a question?
I do have a question. I heard recently, and I'm not sure if I heard correctly, so I want to ask if you might clarify whether planting trees within areas which we might want to have as flower meadows can be detrimental to the flower meadow. Do they go together, or do they not go together?
It depends. I mean, if you had a large area, then having some trees that don't cast a lot of shade is okay. I mean, typically one would say something like ash, but you know, you're loath to sort of plant ash these days, really. But really, yeah, you need to decide between the two and which you're going to have where, because the shade is not, and the leaf fall, which creates sort of nutrient enrichment in the soil, is not perfect for wildflowers. So you need to kind of have a balance of the two, really. But you know, a few trees that don't cast much shade, and then some open areas or some rough grassland on the edge of some scrub is brilliant. I mean, the thing I always say to people is that wildlife thrives on a diversity of habitat.
Yes,
you need as much different stuff as you can get in there.
Yeah, thank you.
Helen, could I ask you a question in terms of how much we could do with our county wildlife sites? And there are other wildlife sites in Wymondham, aren't there, that aren't quite up to county wildlife? There are other ones as well, I think. I mean, I'm thinking the one alongside the Bays River, for example.
Yeah, I mean, those that are privately owned, it's very, very difficult to have any influence. We do try and do our best, but not every landowner rises to the bait, really. You know, some of them just don't want to know. So really, I think, you know, we will try and continue. As if you've got good local volunteers, that's sometimes really helpful. Excuse me, because we can actually sort of say, well, you know, some volunteer help is really good. I mean, for example, a couple of years ago, I managed to get some funding for some work to be done along the railway embankment, at the top of the railway embankment by the lizards, because it was starting to scrub up and a lot of the sort of flowers were disappearing under the scrub. But that could equally be done by volunteers in the future, or a combination of volunteers and a contractor. So that's sometimes a really helpful thing. But, you know, beyond that, it is just looking at ways to stop these sites being quite so isolated.
Yeah. How much can those sites accommodate intrusion by the public?
I think most of those Wymondham sites already have quite a degree of public access, don't they? I think the only one that doesn't really is the Abbey Meadows. Also, Friars Croft, which is classed as a county wildlife site, doesn't have brilliant public access, does it? It's really overgrown.
Really have any, no.
And scrubby, and it's also got quite a few springs on it, so yeah, it's not particularly safe either. No. Until quite a bit of capital can be raised to sort that site out, then there's not a lot you can do with it, really. I don't know where the Archaeology Trust got with Moot Hill. Sort of just before lockdown last year, I had a meeting with Heritage, what they call Historic England, used to be English Heritage, and
yes, the Norfolk Archaeological Trust, and they are still pursuing it, and we are kind of backing them up as well. So yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So we had a meeting with Green in Wymondham, Historic England, and the Archaeological Trust, and they're really keen to take that on. And as most of you know, if you've ventured in, there's actually quite a lot of access in there. Not all of it is desirable, one has to say. Not all of it is safe because that site has got deep water and steep banks. So I think the Archaeology Trust were looking to Historic England for some substantial capital to actually make a sort of circular route that was secure and make the site a bit safer, which I think is probably quite wise. So, you know, public access, yeah, wildlife, to my mind, always needs places where it can get away from people, and particularly away from dogs. Dogs are a problem with wildlife. But, you know, we're quite used to balancing the two in the advice that we give.
I mean, I think I'm quite keen on the Bays River site. If we could contact the landowner and try and see if he or she would play ball with us. But at the moment, it must be rather nice in a way for wildlife because it is completely wild and nobody really goes in there at all.
It's interesting you talk about Brascroft, because obviously there's a development plan for going putting houses in there.
But not the whole site.
Not the whole.
No, it's not suitable. So yeah.
I know it's definitely not suitable. We talked about trees and everything else, which I think is the idea. That any development of that would be totally out.
Yeah, it's only on one side and very little actually coming into the actual county wildlife site. So because yes, my heart slightly jumped when I found out that's what the plans. But I've seen some of the plans for it, and it doesn't really take up much of the site. That's the wild area because they can't. It's too wet. They've realised quite quickly it wasn't suitable.
Okay, well, I think we've had a jolly good time. Penny's come back again. Last one then, Penny.
Thank you. I want to raise awareness of an issue that we've had at Beckett's Grove. So the residents are kind of complaining to the developers. In the planning permission, there's like 5 or 6 ecology reports, which are part of the planning permission of hundreds of bird and bat wildlife boxes, and indeed an area of a couple of lakes to preserve the wildlife. But enforcement doesn't come in until handover, but the entire site has been reduced to a building site and there is no wildlife left. And the residents are really unhappy about this. It might be my lack of understanding and residents' lack of understanding of how these things work. So what can be done about this disregard for the wildlife in development? Or, you know, what is your perspective, please?
Have you got a view on that, Helen, at all? Or Suzanne?
Jump in here. We're actually having enforcement training to do around planning. So I think that that's the time to raise that, because I think lots of times planning goes through and they don't always adhere to what they're meant to. I know Annette is joining that enforcement training as well. So hopefully we can find out some information there and have lots of questions for them, because that's something that bothers me as well, to be honest.
And strangely enough, we had an environment strategy meeting this morning, and enforcement and conditions was something we were talking about in that as well, because we were recognising that actually we put conditions on planning, but there's no follow-up to find out if they've actually fulfilled those conditions. Also, do we have the teeth to actually, how much strength do we have to actually enforce that if they haven't? And can we, so it's, and also we were also aware of land that we were handing over to people. If there was conditions on it, are these people aware that there's conditions on this land when it's coming to them, and for them to follow up on that to make sure that the developer finishes off what, so say it says tree guards have to be removed after 10 years. If we then transfer that asset to a community group or a management company, are they being told that in 10 years time that's what the developer is supposed to be paying to do? So there are things that these conversations are starting to happen. How quickly, but it is on our minds.
I'd just like to confirm, in my years of experience, local authorities, not just here, do not enforce what they should be enforced in regard to legislation and such like. and I'm aware of a lot of contractors just getting away with blue murder because no one enforces what they should be enforcing. And it's precisely what you're saying there. You need to get in quick before they disappear to get these things done with. And as Suzanne said there, as part of the planning conditions, you use that as your legislation to actually enforce them to do it. And then you have control measures that you need to get in before they do a runner. I think that's the key factor.
Well, my hope is that with a bit of luck, if there's anything good coming out of this pandemic, all of the office spaces that people in town centres will be saying, why are we paying for this office space? Our staff can work quite well from home. All the shops that people are saying, well, no, we won't bother to go there anymore. They can be turned into nice flats, lots of them in the towns, and then they can leave the green space for the wildlife.
It's the point of view. Okay, I think I'm going to wind it up now because I think we've had a great time. So many thanks to our speakers, and I think Matt's defected, but I don't blame him. You know, we'll prepare ourselves at our next meeting at Greening Wymondham, which is a week on Saturday, to have a discussion about what actions we might take forward. And anybody here is welcome to attend our Zoom meeting a week on Saturday if they want to get involved in the discussion. Those who aren't on the
I will try and feed back to you, Tony, about your email before that meeting, so you've got something to report back on.
Lovely.
Bless you.
Thank you. Okay,